Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Testers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. With us today, as always, Cecil over there on camera and Sarah over there, not on camera, but disembodied voice. We together work with a practice called Effective Artistry that does therapy and executive functioning coaching, as well as group versions of both of those, specialized groups, etc. We won't take a lot of time talking about all that stuff. The point of this hour is that we get a chance to talk with any of you here in chat. Feel free to ask questions, comments, whatever, at any point, because we want it to be a conversation. We pick a theme every week. The theme this week is goals, but we picked the theme just so that we have something to get going with and have questions prepared. For those of you who are here, if you have any questions or thoughts, they don't have to be about goals. We can talk about whatever people here want to talk about. So, having said all that, I'm going to ask you like I do every week. I expected probably the same answer. Did I cover everything, Cecil?
Yes. And anybody who's watching can...
Uh-oh, I'm delayed. Am I delayed from you guys? Or are you
Not that I know of. I just maybe slow to respond.
No, your audio and video doesn't match. I'm going to pop out and back in and see if that resolves the problem.
Hopefully it's not on my end. Here we never have technical issues. Oh no, I've been made the main screen. It's like, oh no.
It's Cecil's favorite thing. Here.
It's like when everyone talks about, there we go. It's like when Jenna Maroney in 30 Rock, it's like, oh no, it's grocery store lighting. It's like,
Oh.
Cool.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, we're all moving each other. There we go. Yeah, Brennan, you're back. Welcome back.
Hello, I'm back. See, my goal was to not be delayed. No.
Nice.
I told you I need to like create a pause for a second to take a sip of my tea. Oh, and my Wi-Fi connection isn't good. I'll swap that. Maybe that'll help. And as always, we are never interested in spending any of our finite resources on taking something away from somebody else that helps them. Anything that helps is great. We're just trying to add extra options for those people who have not been helped by the options of which they're already aware. So here's how we talk about goals. That there is this thing, right, we call desire, intent, that in your working memory, in that part of your brain of which you are aware, where you have the ability to manipulate data, control, awareness, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that when you think about the future, and we've talked in the past about intelligence and the ability to distance from reality and look at the future and the past, which aren't real, but are valid and accurate and blah, blah, blah. So you have an intention of, here's a thing that I want for whatever reason. And we're not going to get too much today unless questions come up about it into why do you want what you want? There's a thing you want. There's a thing that is different than you want it to be, or that you're anticipating might be different than you want it to be, or whatever. That's your goal. That is your intention. Another way that we often talk about it is that it's a problem that you want to solve. There are two different ways to look at the same thing. I'm aware of a thing, or I'm aware that a thing may come to be that is different than I want it to be. The want part is the goal. The different part is the problem. Same deal. Now we have different specific like formats in which to take those goals, and things like SMART goals, which we may talk about today, that a lot of people already know about, but if you don't, it can be a helpful thing to use. But to utilize those intentions, to put them out in some form, whether that's talking about it, writing it down, declaring some intention, and then being able to go forward on that intention. And we talk a lot about there are 3 steps to doing a thing. The first is to know what you want. The second is to make a plan. The third is to execute. And so when there's a discrepancy, when there's an issue, we work backwards typically. First, we look at the execution. Was there a problem there? And we try and resolve that because that's easiest. If that's not working, we can move up a step and say, well, what about the plan? Is there an issue with the plan and something that's not working there that we can change? And if that's not working, we can move up a step again and say, okay, what is it about what you want? Are we sure that this is what we want, the specifics of it, etc.? So we're going to talk about two like big conceptualizations in this, like, where I ramble about something, part of it, before we get into the questions. One is positive goals versus negative goals. And I've already lost the other one, so maybe I'll figure it out again by the time we get done with this. Positive goals versus negative goals does not mean good goals and bad goals. It means positive means the addition of or the presence of a thing. You are trying to add to what exists. You want something in your life. You want to create something, achieve something, experience something. Negative goals means negative in the sense of to lessen or eliminate or avoid, to have less of a thing, to stop being exposed to a thing or experiencing a thing. So I want to get an ice cream cone is a positive goal. I want to stop feeling stressed is a negative goal. And both are fine. Neither one is good or bad. They do different things. But what happens is that everybody always, without trying, develops negative goals because we experience things that we don't like for whatever reason. And that automatically becomes a negative goal of varying levels of importance of, I don't want to do that again. And sometimes we do it because it's worth it for whatever other thing and blah, 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 blah. But we experience things that we don't like and we don't want to do them again. That's what it means to not like a thing, is to not want it again. And that's now a negative goal. Positive goals, they take more intention. You have to sit down and think about what you want. You don't come by them naturally necessarily. Oh, goals and markers. Help me remember that, Cecil. That was the other concept.
Goals and markers.
Goals and markers. Positive goals take some amount of your time and energy and effort and awareness. It is a task that you have to do. They don't happen automatically like negative goals do. Now, the problem with negative goals is that they can never be accomplished. That if your goal is, for example, to never smoke another cigarette, you cannot accomplish that until the second you die. That even if you go 40 years without smoking a cigarette, then you might smoke one, and now you failed this goal of never smoking a cigarette. And obviously, we use that example because it's a little more common in the pop culture and easier to deal with. But in reality, the negative goals that we tend to struggle with are things more like, I don't want to let anybody down. I don't want to fail. I don't want to get hurt, right? These negative experiences that we've had that we don't want to replicate. And we can do that for a long time, but the work will never be done. If your goal is to never get hurt, you must be vigilant every moment of every day to be able to prevent that. Even in the safest environment, things can go wrong, right? If your goal is to never let someone down, never disappoint anyone, you can never accomplish that. It requires constant resource usage to sustain that. Because there are going to be things sometime, someday, somewhere that you do not notice. Remember, awareness, attention are finite resources. There's going to be things that you don't know to look for, and the brain doesn't prioritize, and you miss, and then it happens. And then you adapt and you add that in, and now it takes even more energy because you're watching out for this additional thing in addition to everything you were watching out for, right? So again, that's not to say negative goals are bad. We can't avoid having them even if we wanted to. We all have things, I don't want to die, right? Like that's a universal negative goal. Positive goals, we have to put intention toward, and the benefit of a positive goal is that it can be accomplished. We can track it and check it and say, oh, yep, I did that thing. That's done. I can now free up the resources that were going toward that thing to do something else with. I can know when it is accomplished, even if it is not a SMART goal, which, like I said, we'll probably talk about those today. Doesn't mean that it has to be observable in some kind of, empirical way that you see it the same way I see it. I can set a goal for myself of, I want to be in a loving relationship and not have to define that. Now, defining it in observable ways serves another purpose, right? But that in and of itself is a positive goal, and I can accomplish it. Of course, as soon as I accomplish it, I'm going to have a negative goal of, I don't want to lose this relationship. That's the contradiction of being a human being.
What? There's only one?
Yeah. Does that make sense? Just as a definition, so that when I say positive goal versus negative goal, people know what I'm saying now.
Yeah, it's like everyone wants to think of like, oh, positive goals are happy and negative goals are sad, when it's like, it's not that.
Yeah, no.
And
All
dogs,
goals are happy. Every goal is defined as a thing that you want, right? Sorry, go ahead, Cecil.
oh, no, it's like in interacting with dogs, so that it's like you focus on what dogs are doing opposed to what they're not doing, and it's like the whole thing. But never mind. I guess that's a tangent we can go down, but we won't.
Well, maybe we will. So the other concept is goals and markers. And this one I like a lot. I don't hear many people talking about it a lot, at least not necessarily in this term. And what that means is there are things that we want that are so difficult to measure progress towards, right? That are indefinable or difficult to define or very far away, right? I want to be a successful adult. It's like, okay, that's a great goal, but how do I know if I'm getting there or not? So then we have markers, which are things that correlate to the goal, not cause, but correlate to. So if I set a goal of, I want to be happy, well, that's a very difficult thing to measure. Like if I attempt strategy A, did that get me closer to the goal of being happy? Yes or no? And we've talked in the past, like in terms of measuring energy, that you can always make up your own language, make up your own scales to be able to observe these things. But we have a lot of this stuff kind of built in. So for example, nobody cares about money. Nobody cares about money. We care about other things that we believe we need money for, or that are more likely to come to pass if we have money. So I'm not saying that money doesn't matter. It absolutely does. It's fine to say money can't buy happiness to somebody who has money, but saying it to somebody who does not is a pretty crappy thing to say.
Yeah.
Oh, my headphone must have died, I guess. I'm actually going to leave it in because just the sound dampening helps me to focus more. I have auditory sensitivity stuff. So nobody cares about money. We care about other things, but money is a marker for those things. I want to be happy. Well, if I have more money, I'm more likely to be able to do whatever thing comes up to me that occurs to me in the future to want to be able to do. I have more freedom, more power, more control, whatever, if I have more money. So the money now is a marker, and I can set goals around that marker. I want to make X number of dollars per hour, month, year, whatever, which allows me to observe more closely in real time. Okay, if I do this, does that get me closer to my goal or not, as opposed to the more difficult to measure, I want to be happy. But when you have a marker disconnected from a goal, that becomes problematic, because having more money is great. But if the goal is in and of itself to have more money, that is now another goal that you can't accomplish. More is not a goal that can be accomplished. Best is not a goal that can be accomplished. There are people who attempt to do their best version of a thing or get the most they can of a thing, and no amount will ever be enough because the goal is to have as much as possible, and there's always more to theoretically get. So it's important to make sure that if you're looking at a marker, that they're useful. It's not that they're not useful. They're useful, but you have to be aware of what it is you're going for. So in case of money, connect that to reality, connect that to the actual things that you care about. You don't care about the number in your bank. You think that the number in your bank accurately, I'm saying, I'm not trying to say like money, you accurately believe that having a higher number in the bank will enable you to X, Y, or Z. What is the X, Y, or Z? How much money do you need in order to have all the things that you want, including peace of mind because there's money there in case I need it, including freedom to be able to decide something on a whim and have money for it. I'm not saying like budget and get exactly that amount. Those other things matter too. Grades, very common marker. Weight is a very common marker. We don't care about the number on the scale. We care about how we feel. We care about how we might feel in the future. We care about how we look or how we think other people perceive us. But it's hard to do a diet, which is hard, or do an exercise routine, which is hard, in order to work towards that goal and not be able to observe it in real time, week to week, and perception changes. So we look at the number as a way to track, does this thing work for me or not, right? But again, if you focus just on the number, disconnected from what it is you're actually trying to get, and you're not observing what you're actually trying to get, you get into trouble. Money can't buy happiness, but having a comfortable amount of money relieves a certain point of stress and anxiety. It allows you to work on other things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
Money is, so privilege is another way of looking at the same thing. Privilege is not typically, at least in the way that I talk about it, I don't find it very useful to talk about privilege in terms of, thank you, Heather, for that comment. I don't typically find it very useful to talk about privilege in terms of things that are present in my life, which wouldn't otherwise have been if I wasn't whatever thing the privilege is attached to, right? That it's about there are things that I don't have to do, things that I don't have to be aware of. I'm 6'5", like relatively big guy, you know, masculine presenting male walking around, cis, whatever. I spend less of my resources, my attention, my working memory on, is somebody eyeing me or thinking about attacking me? Am I safe? I have to spend fewer of my resources on that vigilance than somebody else might have to, with different variables, different traits. And therefore those resources are freed up for me to spend on other things. So yeah, money is a stand-in for that in some ways, that I don't have to worry. When I go to the store, I have enough money that I don't have to check, you know, which size of the cereal has the better price per ounce, because I'll be okay either way. So that frees up my time and whatever. Yeah, I like that. Those are the concepts that I wanted to talk, but just language to put out there. And then now we can get into questions and talking about like practical applications or what things people might be wondering about.
So, is it Sarah?
Yeah, that was me. No,
Yeah.
I have a question, but I'll get in line behind Cecil.
No, you go first. You go first, because it might be a ramble.
So I have lots of questions about goals. As an artist and actor, I'll just, you know, self-disclose that I think when there's like New Year's resolutions that you're making, or like I'm setting a goal, sometimes I get into the setting a goal that I can't necessarily control. Of like, I'll give an example. Like, I want to book 3 voiceover auditions that I've sent in. So I'd like to book the job that I've sent in. But there are so many factors that I have zero control over. And so it feels like I can't like work towards it necessarily. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly.
No, I think you're explaining it very well. Yeah. That's an important thing to know. So we talk about, you know, when we talk about executive functioning, we start with that description of there's a gap between what people want in their lives and what they have in their lives. And there are a lot of things that contribute to that gap. And some of them we have more influence over, and some of them we have less influence over. So when you set a goal like this, which I like, it's a good goal, you know, it fulfills the conditions of a SMART goal, which I keep referencing, so we really should probably talk about. And you're right, there are elements of this that you cannot control, but there are things that you can do that make it more likely to happen. So it's nice to set a goal, because the point of 3 voiceover jobs as opposed to I want to book more voiceover jobs, right? Is what you're doing is when you book 3 voiceover jobs, you can rest. You can say, okay, I have figured out whatever the things are that I've been doing to get to this point have allowed me to get to where I wanted to be, and now I can stop. And part of that is to check back in and say, okay, now do I want a higher goal? Now that I know more, do I want 5 voiceover jobs in a month or whatever? So that it's an end point to kind of take a break and check in and see where you want to go. But what you're really measuring is how many voiceover jobs do you book? So booking 2 is better than booking 1, and booking 1 is better than booking 0, right? So yeah, you don't have control over every element of the process, but there are things. So I'll ask you, for example, if you're comfortable answering these questions.
Sure, yeah.
What are some things that you have experimented with and learned that if I do X versus Y, I am more likely to get jobs? It seems to correlate with getting more jobs.
Sure. I mean, I guess there's just do the audition.
Right, so doing more auditions, which is something that is more in your control, still not completely, because you don't know, you know, like you have to be presented with opportunities for auditions, but doing an audition is something that's more under your control. You have more influence over. So do more auditions is one. Good. What else?
I guess I could like take a class, get some feedback from another professional in the field.
Great. So some of these things are things that you've probably actually done and attempted and observed the correlation. Does it result in the things that I'm looking for? Some of these things may be things that you either haven't done or did do, but didn't measure a correlation of, do things go better when I do them, but are advice that has been given to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's why we say it's, what do you want? Then make a plan, then execute, which I don't know if this is going backward. To me, this is right, you know, the direction that you read, left to right. but I don't know if it's showing up backwards on the stream. Anyway, irrelevant.
It is, but I get what you're saying.
So you're setting the intention, organizing your energy, prioritizing. We have different terms for this. What you're doing is you're giving a declaration to that pre-conscious process that we've talked about that dictates where your attention and where your awareness goes. That setting a goal in language influences that process. We've talked in the past about mindfulness, that you cannot control what you're aware of, but if you give yourself a goal right now of find 5 red things, then all of a sudden the brain responds to that because the brain is attempting to measure and accomplish your goal. So you put a plan into place. Oh, I'm going to start looking around, and then you execute it, you do it, blah, blah, blah. So the goal is the first step of that process. It allows you to plan and observe and then execute and all that kind of stuff. So that's a great goal if you understand that some of that is under your control and some is not. And what you're doing is you're attempting to come up with a plan and modify your plan, different things to try, and then measure the correlations of, does this get me closer or further away? This is a thing that comes up a lot in dieting and exercise and kind of stuff too. It's, okay, great. There's this idea that if I were to do that workout routine, I would get the 6-pack that I'm trying to get or whatever. But if you can't do it, then it's not a very good plan, right? So, the more common a piece of advice is, the more it tends to work for people, or it wouldn't be so common. But that doesn't mean that it will work for you. So you still have to try it and measure and throw it away if it doesn't. Not because it's bad or harmful necessarily, although sometimes it is, but because it's taking up resources that you could spend on trying a new and different strategy that might be more beneficial to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the key with, I think, what you're asking, and I could be wrong, so clarify if I'm wrong, but is to understand that elements of this are things that you can do to make it more likely that the outcome happens, not to make it so that the outcome happens. So that even if it doesn't, that's not because you did it wrong, or that it's your fault, or that you're bad or broken or deficient in some way. We can never, there is nothing that we can predict with 0% or 100% certainty. We can get so close that it's, we might as well call it 100, I can predict the sun will come up tomorrow. And even though there is technically a chance that doesn't happen, it's a pretty safe prediction to make, right?
Yeah.
So as an exercise, Sarah, this is a great goal. You now know what you want. So your brain can organize its resources around, okay, this is a higher priority. Now that we've put language around it, we can notice and track things differently. Next step is the plan. And that's when you ask yourself this question: what can I do? Well, you can start with this. How likely do I think it is that I will book 3 voiceover jobs this month? And it's a guess, it's a prediction. It's using the best information you have at the time to make a guess. And you'll never know. I could say right now there's a 99.9% chance Godzilla will burst forth from the ocean tomorrow. And I can't be wrong about that. If it doesn't happen, I'll be like, well, I said there was a 0.1% chance that it wouldn't happen, So these things aren't useful in terms of predicting the future, but they are useful in terms of helping us to organize and prioritize our energy, our resources. So you start with that. How likely, here, let's do this exercise. Okay. How likely do you currently think right now it is that you will book 3 voiceover jobs in the month of May?
In the month of May.
It's not impossible. It's not certain. What percentage likelihood is it?
I would say there's a 30%.
Okay. And then the next step is, what can be done to get that percentage higher?
I think, well, I took a step yesterday, which was to reach out to my agents and ask for feedback.
Great.
That would be one thing that I can control.
So that made it more likely. Some measure, if we had asked you yesterday, you might still have said 30% because it's all just subjective. Mm-hmm. But then you would have said after doing that, oh, now it's more likely, so it's gone up. What else? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No. I'm fine with this, and I think that people can also relate because it's I'm talking about voiceover jobs, but there's also other jobs, and this I think is relatable in ways. Right. So I'm happy to.
If we took a full coaching session, for example, to work on this, mm-hmm. The point is that yes, I would, as your coach, run this exercise with you and help you to distinguish and observe and track and all that stuff that we all talk about all the time. But then I would also say things back to you like, okay, well, one thing that you already told me that is more under your control and makes it more likely is that you can do more auditions.
Mm-hmm.
So how many auditions, when you do that 30%, how many auditions is that including? If I usually do about 6 auditions, and therefore it makes it 30%. And is it possible, or is it worth it, the cost for you to aim for doing 8 auditions next month? Mm-hmm. And if so, how much more likely does that make it? What would it cost you to do that? Is that worth taking it from a 30% chance to a 35% chance?
Yeah, that's a big issue too, and other actors will understand this. So like the agent sends the voiceover auditions, right? And so you don't know how many you're going to get. I guess there was a while there where I was really busy and I just wasn't turning them in. And I was like, too busy, sorry, not turning these in. And so lately I've been really trying to like turn them all in, but like sometimes there's 2 in a month. This month, I think there's probably been like 20. So I'm exhausted at night and I still want to get these in. And so I'm recording voiceover at 11 p.m. when I'd rather be sleeping and doing that to up my chances, I guess.
Yeah. So here, that's a great example of how these things can get really complicated, right? That nothing is as simple as, oh, if I do this, it's a 2% increase.
Right.
That there are factors outside of your control. But here's a question that you can still use this exercise to help with what you're doing right now, because I could phrase it this way. All right, so you've been given 20 auditions in order, to opportunity to do and submit 20 auditions. And you just told me that you're pushing yourself very hard. You're working at times that you would rather be sleeping. Mm-hmm. So now let's talk about opportunity costs. That another goal of yours is to feel rested, right? And feeling rested probably makes it more likely that you do a good job in another audition, which makes it more likely that you book it. And it's all messy and combined. But here's a question. At that time, last night, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., whatever time it was, you can say, here are my options. I can go to bed and get rested and come back to this tomorrow, perhaps, or maybe there was a deadline or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or I can do this audition right now. Of those 2 choices, both of them make it more likely that I accomplish my goal of getting 3 voiceover jobs. Which one of them makes it more likely? That if I do the audition right now, then that's an audition submitted that might not have otherwise been submitted. So that increases my chances. But if I get some rest and then get back to the other auditions tomorrow, those auditions will be better, and therefore it's more likely. So which one increases the chances more? You don't have to answer that, but that's
it's great to break it down that way. Yeah. And I'm thinking like with my specific situation, it's like usually you get the auditions like a day before. And so it is that question of, do I do this like at 11 p.m. or do I wake up at 8 a.m. and do it like when I'm not a morning person. So it's like, even though I'm really tired at night, like, should I just do the thing? And then my morning self will be very happy with my past self.
Yeah. Or do you pass up on that audition altogether and lessen the workload so that your auditions for each of the other 19 are that much better, however much better they are? And this is where we get into that goals versus markers, because again, your real goal is not to book 3 voiceover jobs. Mm-hmm. Your real goal is to be able to, live stress-free, have enough money through your art and not having to do whatever other thing you might otherwise have to do to make money, etc. But that's not super useful. So we break it down to the marker. Well, a marker for this goal of booking 3 voiceover jobs is submitting auditions. Submit every audition that comes my way. That's a marker. The more you are able to do that, the more likely it is that you get the voiceover jobs, right? But if we start to disconnect it, and now that just becomes a goal independent of what it is trying to aim at, and your goal now is I have to submit every voiceover, well, the calculations are different. You would still do a voiceover at 3 a.m., even if that trashed your voice and the rest of your auditions were terrible, if your goal was to submit every audition.
Right.
But if you can step back and say, no, that's actually a marker that I'm using towards my goal of voiceover jobs. Let me think, is this actually the best use of my resources to get towards that goal? And is going for the 3 voiceover jobs my best way of going towards my real goal of, money or stress-free life or whatever it is?
Yeah. That's great. Also, people feel free to, I was just going to say, feel free to ask questions. I know like I'm taking up the time myself, but we're also open to other questions if anyone wants to put any in the chat.
I mean, so like this brings up a good question, just because we have all of these, like the social pressure and these expectations, and I know we've talked about this in the past with previous streams. But how do we know that we're making goals that are like things that we actually want, opposed to things that we feel pressure to do? Like, I mean, weight loss or like go to the gym is a great one. Like everyone wants to be like that person. It's like, oh yeah, like they have it all together. They're well rested. They go to the gym all the time, and like, that unrealistic person that no one ever could or will ever be. Like, how do we determine that? Like what we really want and like does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So here's, I think, what you're really getting at, because the easy and simple answer is if you want a thing, you want it. There is no other metric to determine whether or not you want it. If you want it, you want it. You're the only one that would know. But I think what you're really asking is, what is it about this that I want? Why do I want it? Do I really care about the weight, or do I care about something else? Do I really care about the exercise, or do I care about something else? I think
like Sarah's like, is it the 3 voiceover jobs, or is it that you can continue your art and get paid for it? Like that kind of idea is like,
yeah. So
like,
what I was saying earlier is that this stuff is complicated, right? And we can always make anything more complicated or simpler, which is different from easier and harder. Simple and easy are two different things. So we can go endlessly complicated, as with anything, into, okay, do I really care about going to the gym, or is it about the weight? Is it about the weight, or is it really about how people perceive me? Is it about how people perceive me, or is it really about how I feel about myself, etc.? The point is to go as complicated as you need to in order to solve the problem. Okay. Because there is no such thing as causation. I know that's a ridiculous statement to make, but we cannot, and again, this is technical, not practical, but technically we can never know for certain that any one thing has caused any one other thing. It is always possible, for example, that there are things that we are incapable of perceiving that are influencing whatever that thing was, right? What we are tracking are correlations. And the more that two things are correlated, the more we start to think in terms of like, oh, this causes that. And yes, in practical terms, if I push over my glass of water and it spills, I can say I caused that to happen, even though technically we could say, well, I don't know what other factors might have been involved that I didn't perceive. But that's not very practical and useful. So we can always go more complicated. It's what's the simplest thing that works. So in other words, goal, plan, execution. When you come up with the goal, whether it's 3 voiceover jobs, whether it's submit every audition that comes to me, whether it's make $500, whatever, then does that enable you to make a plan that you can execute and observe that it gets you closer to the goal? In other words, if all that works, the goal is great. If you're feeling better, if you're getting more of what you want, less of what you don't want, then it's a good goal and a good plan and a good execution. If it is not, that's when we want to start asking those other questions about, okay, what am I missing here? And again, we start with the execution. What am I missing in the execution? What could I do that would bring the cost down, make it more easy, whatever? Then I move up to the plan if that's not working. Okay, what is it are there other options and ways to do this that I'm not aware of, or that I thought weren't a good option, but really there's a better way to adjust this part of it or whatever? And if that's still not working, then we go up to the goal and say, okay, what do I really want here? Because I've wanted a 6-pack my whole life and I've never been able to do it. Do I really care? Because it's not like I'm walking around saying like, oh God, I'm the worst because I don't have a 6-pack,
Yeah.
So what is it that I really want? Because and that's when it's worth getting into that work. And it is complicated and difficult. There's no right answer. That's the root of your question is, how do we know what we really want? Mm-hmm. All of it, any of it. There is no metric by which we could say, what did you want? And you'd say an answer, and I say, nope, that's not it. You didn't get it. It's whatever you want it to be. So it's about what is useful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And some of that is done preemptively, right? Like people who are watching this and listening to this might, the next time they think about a weight loss goal, now be aware of, is that the most effective way for me to think about it or not? But for the most part, we will never know if the goal is good or bad, or the plan is good or bad, until it hasn't worked, until there's been a problem.
So like most things we talk about, it's always about, kind of attempting something, try to go through it, reevaluate and adjust. that a good way of looking at it? Okay.
Yep. And again, I always tell people that that's not me saying this is what we should do. That is what we do. Every person does every day. That's what you do. You come up with an idea, you try it. If it works, you keep going. If it doesn't, you drop it. When we get stuck on things, by the time people come to us for therapeutic or coaching support, right? It's because everything that we have tried, everything of which we are aware that could be done has not worked for us. And we've run out of ideas of new things to try. So that's when we turn to other people.
Okay.
Because there's only two ways to get data. One is from the environment, which means you have to experience a thing, see it, feel it, whatever for yourself. And one is intellectual, meaning that data has to be passed to me through language, like we talked about last week, that you use words to implant information into my head. So either I'm getting data by trying a thing, experiencing a thing, or I'm getting it from somebody else communicating it to me, whether that's in the form of a conversation or a website or a live stream or a book or whatever. It's the only way to know about things that you cannot yourself perceive and touch and feel. You can imagine things, but you can only know if they're real from somebody else telling you about them.
So we have another question that we have, and I think this relates. It's a kind of a bigger question. So it's how do I know if my goal is realistic? Kind of like that's one, and such as I want more unscheduled time, but stress about not being able to schedule it in. And if I do, I stress about wasting that time. So
this is great. So first, we keep referencing it. So let's talk about SMART goals real quick, because realistic is one of those things. So I'll just put that framework out there. This is not ours. This is something that's been around for a long time, and different people define it a little bit differently. But SMART is an acronym meaning specific, measurable, actionable, or some people will say achievable. R is realistic, or some people will say relevant, and T is timely. Meaning, if I set a goal, like I said before, of I want to be happy, that's not a SMART goal. It's not specific, it's not measurable, actionable, etc. Now, really it is, but this is a framework to make it easier to make a good plan. So specific means it is this specific thing versus another version of that thing. So I want to book 3 voiceover jobs is specific versus I want to get more work is not specific. Even though it's measurable, you can measure, did you get more work this month than last month? It's not specific. Measurable is measurable. Can you observe the thing and track it and write it down? Would somebody else be able to observe the thing and track it, and that your observations would line up? I can know whether you had 3 voiceover jobs or not, Sarah, just as well as you can. Whereas if your goal is to feel more confident, I can't, whatever. Attainable, so it's actionable or achievable are usually, meaning, is there something I can do that will help me get towards this goal? Because I can have a goal that, the pandemic is over by tomorrow, but can I do anything actionable towards that? Is there a way for me to identify what I would do to make that happen? Realistic or relevant means those are 2 different things. That's why the A's and the R's switch depending on how you're talking about, but the 2 of them come together. One of them means, is it reasonable to say I can do something about this? And the other means, do I care? That I could set a goal right now of I'm going to make $1 million by the end of the year, but I don't really care about that. So it's not relevant to me and what I'm trying to do. And time bound or timely means I set a deadline on it so that I can measure, is it done by that time? Now, this framework is nice. It is very popular mostly because it's used in the professional world. It's a very good framework for corporations to use, to be able to have clarity and actionables and delivery and measurables and such within the structure of an organization. So I like it, but it is also limited because I might set a goal of, I want to be happier, right? And that's not a SMART goal, but it's not a bad goal. Now, if it works, great, because it's simple. If it doesn't, we get more into the complexity. Okay, what are the things, like the exercise we just did or various other ones. Or for example, that I might set a goal that I want to have fun more often. And can I measure having fun in a way that you can similarly measure? No, but I can still observe when I'm having fun. I know what it means. And that's all that matters for me. If I'm doing an organization-wide goal for a large group of people, then it's more helpful to go in this framework. But for an individual, do whatever goal you want to do. So let's go back to the question because I forgot about it already.
So how to know my goals realistic? About scheduling unscheduled time.
So part of the issue is that some goals masquerade as positive goals when they are actually negative goals. And my guess is that this is likely one of those. Because here we've got more unscheduled time, which, like we said, when I say more or when I say my best, the best, that's an unachievable goal. You can get an hour more unscheduled time this week than you did the last week, but then next week you can get more, and next week you can get more. So there's never an ending point. So you might want to look at that and be more, flip it into something that can be achieved and be done. But even further than that, I suspect that this is actually more of like a negative goal in disguise, in the form of like, I feel so overwhelmed. I don't want to be overwhelmed. I want to be less overwhelmed. I want to be less stressed, right? I stress about being able to schedule it in. I stress about wasting the time. I stress. I want to be less stressed. And the marker that you're looking at now, because the theory, the idea you came up with is, in order to feel less stressed, I think that would be the case if I had more unscheduled time. And so then you go test that theory. And if it's working for you, great. If it's not, which it doesn't sound like it is, then rather than keep banging your head against the wall trying to go with this plan that isn't working for you, you may want to throw it away and come up with a different theory of what could I do to feel less stress? And again, even that is a negative goal with an open ending, less instead of, so I would say even flip it. What is it if, in other words, here's another like exercise question that we can ask. Okay, right now you're spending a certain amount of your resources, your time, your energy, or whatever, feeling stressed. If that were to decrease, if you were to free up some of those resources, what would you want those resources to go to? What would you want to be feeling, doing, experiencing instead? Because now you've identified what you want. And I think we talked about this before, but just in case we didn't, there is no mechanism that exists for the brain to stop thinking about a thing or think less of a thing or stop noticing or notice a thing less. There are only mechanisms that allow us to notice a thing more, but because of finite resources, the more I notice this, by definition, the less I notice that. But if my attempt is, I got to think about this thing less, well, that right there is you thinking about the thing. So it's literally not accomplishable. So the very basic way to flip a negative goal into a positive goal, and this is, I think, better, but still, there's always more work to be done. But again, simplest that works. And this is the simplest way to flip a negative into a positive with something like stress, is to say this question. You don't always feel the same level of stress, right? Moment to moment, day to day, your stress level fluctuates. If it feels as though you are feeling the exact same level of stress at all times, then this is an observational issue, which we've talked about in the past. It means that you don't have the language to observe, to direct your attention to what you're experiencing, and then code it and process it into long-term memory in a way that you can track. Because it is definitely not true that you have the exact same level of stress moment to moment, every single moment, all the time. If it feels that way, we want to go back to observation. But assume that you are aware of the fact that you experience different levels of stress. Well, then stress is not a binary. That it's not that I am stressed or am not stressed. Stress lies at one end of a spectrum. On this end of the spectrum is stress. And the closer I get to it, the more stress I'm feeling, and the further away, the less stress I'm feeling. What is this end of the spectrum? Name that. That's the exercise. And of course, I could come up with a bunch of words and labels to put on it. But for you, it'll be most effective for you to say, what is this end of the spectrum? As I become less stressed, I become more what? And then start tracking that instead. Go back to that observation and you're developing language and scales and whatever things. That's the very basic, simple way to flip a negative into a positive. Here is an example of something that people think is a simple way to flip negative into positive, but is not. It's just being clever with words. Is when someone says, I don't want to feel stressed anymore. And they say, okay, but what do you want? And they say, I want to not feel stressed anymore. That's just playing around with words. That's still a negative goal. But I don't want to leave the question unanswered and just say, oh, your strategy is bad based on my guess that you're really trying to go for. But you do have to measure that. Your idea is more unscheduled time will make me less stressed. If you are getting more unscheduled time, but it's making you more stressed, it was a bad strategy, or at very least an incomplete strategy, and you need to find something else to couple with it so that the unscheduled time now equals less stress. As far as how do you know if your goal is realistic? You don't. That's the other problem with a SMART goal is, like I said, we can't be 100% certain or 0% certain that a thing will happen. But that same exercise can be a good guide to you of whether or not it's realistic. So start with the same question. How likely do I think it is that I do this thing, that I get this thing, that this thing happens? And depending on where that number lies, then you can ask yourself the question of, okay, what things can I do that make it more or less likely that it will happen? And if you run through everything you can come up with, get support from other people to make suggestions and see, do I think that makes it more likely or less likely? And you still end up at a number like 20%, you can probably say like, okay, not super realistic. But just like with Sarah's goal, that doesn't mean it's a bad goal. If you understand that what you're doing is trying to make something that's very unlikely a little more likely, even though it really still may not happen, that it's more likely to happen. So in other words, if your goal is to, for example, go on a date, right? Meet somebody and go on a date. Well, start with where you're at. And if you say, well, it's the pandemic and I'm stuck in my house and I can't go out and whatever, so it's like a 1% chance that I meet somebody that I want to go on a date with. Okay, so yeah, we can say that's not a very realistic goal. But you could still say, well, I guess if I get on the dating apps, like the chance goes from 1% to 6% or whatever. So it still might be worth it, because the question then is cost and value. What does it cost you to get on the dating apps? And is it worth the 5% increased chance that this thing will happen? So effectively what you're saying is I feel like even if I do that, it still is not going to happen, but it might. And the might is a little bit more. So is it worth it for me? That's how I would say realistic, because again, just like Cecil was asking, nobody can tell you whether a goal is realistic or not. You tell me that you want to like abolish money, like cool. I don't know what things you may or may not be able to do to make that happen. You tell me you want to do it tomorrow, I'll be like, that seems like a low chance of happening. But again, I don't know. Seems like a low chance though. Are you sure about that? I use all these like ridiculous examples.
Yeah, I mean, it's good though, because it gives us perspective on that. Heather, what this it's like.
I was just going to say that I like that comment from Heather. Someone once said that goals are the difference between what you want and what you want right now. Sounds a bit ableist, but it might just be because it's massively reductive. I agree with all of the things that you just said. And if you go watch the VOD we did 2 weeks ago, no, we didn't do this. So, because we also do a podcast webinar on Wednesday evenings, and that podcast, someone else here will have to tell you when it's coming out, but I think it's soon.
End of this week.
End of this week.
The first couple episodes, I think. And episode 4 was on intelligence. I think that's right. So anyway, what you're talking about in that, or what that person is talking about, goals are the difference between what you want and what you want right now. I like that. As always, it's just language, right? They're defining the word goal to mean that thing. So it's obviously true because that's how they're using the word. But we put that in terms of intelligence. Executive functioning is what allows you to deal consciously with the environment. So the autonomic part of your brain, the part of which you have no awareness, deals with stuff that you're not aware of. It makes you sweat when you're too hot, and etc. Executive functioning are those parts of the brain that allow you to consciously interact with your environment. So I am not consciously keeping my heart beating. There's no executive functioning involved. I am consciously trying to speak to you, to read your reactions, Cecil, the reactions of chat, to try and get something across. Everything involved in doing that is executive functioning. Intelligence is about being able to distance from reality, distance from now, and start dealing with more abstracted information, data where I have left more of it out to make it smaller and easier to interact with so that I can make predictions and projections about the future. And so the key to being human, again, not the secret to being human, I mean the thing that we all do all the time already anyway, is what do I most want right now? But then a million other calculations run about okay, but what does that make more likely to happen tomorrow versus doing this thing that is the third thing I'd most like to do right now, but it contributes more likely to this other thing happening tomorrow? And how do we find that right balance between I'm doing things that I enjoy right now versus things that I don't enjoy or enjoy less, but make it more likely for me to be able to have more things that I enjoy later than I would otherwise have? And there's not a right answer on that either. Sometimes it's about stepping back from reality a little more and gaining some distance and thinking about what you want. And sometimes it's about getting out of your head and dealing with reality so that you're not just running 18 million scenarios about what might happen 25 years from now. And yeah, we're all adjusting all the time. Neurodivergent people, I would say, we talk about like executive dysfunction, right? Well, I would frame it more that neurodivergent people have more of a tendency, more of a predilection, predisposition toward thinking about things. That I am stepping back from reality and imagining things, creating things in my head. I'm noticing different things. I'm noticing less of the reality because I'm noticing more of what I'm making up here. And therefore, it's not that I have executive dysfunction per se, it's that fewer of my resources are available to be dealing with the executive functioning part, the actual doing of, because more of them are spent with this. There's a reason that, for example, this is all anecdotal, not researched, I should say, but there's a reason, for example, that anecdotally speaking, it seems to me that neurodivergent people have more of a tendency to get involved in fandoms, to get more involved in, fantasy and sci-fi genre type things where it's a lot of thinking and exploring in this space versus in this space. Maybe that was a bad thing to say. It might not be true. It seems anecdotally true to me.
As we know, that's
I should say too, because we didn't talk about intelligence, that intelligence is not about capacity, but about efficiency. Intelligence, one person who is more intelligent than another, obviously people can mean whatever they mean by that. They might mean have a higher IQ, but what the hell does that mean? When I say intelligent, what I mean is more likely to use intelligence in an attempt to solve a problem. That when I say that I'm intelligent, what I mean is if a problem appears, I'm more likely to be like, okay, let me think this through than I am to be like, bah, like run away or whatever, Not always. Nobody does either thing all the time. Everybody is balanced in some way. It's just which way do you kind of tilt? That's all we're talking about. And that's the reason that when we talk about intelligence, we talk about abstract reasoning, that at school, we correlate intelligence so much with math, for example, which seems like an arbitrary distinction. But there are so many concepts in math that are not observably real, negative numbers, for instance, that require that you be able to distance from reality. But the only purpose of any of that is to do something that then enables you to do something out here. Mm-hmm. If it's just up here, it doesn't matter. Because again, communicating it is executive functioning. Not even just like physically making, explaining it to someone is executive functioning. This is part of where the art and the acting and all that stuff comes into. But maybe that's a future thing, talking about art activity and whatever.
Yeah.
I know we're getting low on time. Do we have another question or like a practical question? Because I've given a couple like practical exercises, but I would love to do more.
I think about like when I talked to my niece, because exams and stuff are coming up right now, and she's struggling just to like her goals right now are just to get through these exams, and that's about it. It's like she's like beyond caring about the grade. She's beyond that because school is very stressful for a lot of kids, and so she's spending hours on things that would typically take her, an hour, and she's spending multiple hours on it, and it's simple and the demands. So what would you say about things like that? Like, someone's like crisis time. Well, just like, I gotta survive this, and that's all.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is that you're using that terminology, survival, get through, right? Get past. And people do this a lot. They take things and they make them binaries. I either will survive it or I won't. But the truth is that she is likely going to survive this no matter what results from the actual test. Right? But it doesn't feel that way. Certain things get weight put on them that is potentially disproportionate to what the reality of it is, which is why we always want to go back to what is it that you really want, right? Because there is something she wants out of this more than just survive the test. Survive the test is a negative goal. I want to not die. I don't want to die. That's a default negative goal that everybody theoretically has, with rare exceptions, their whole lives, right? So that's not really her goal, meaning that someone has given her the impression that she has to perform to this level or to that level. It's important for this reason or for that reason. And it's people that she trusts and cares about, and that their opinions hold value, and she wants to make them happy or not disappoint them. Or she's been told that performing well on this test means she'll be happy and successful for the rest of her life, and not performing well on the test means that she'll be a miserable person for the rest of her life. So you can kind of back up and look at those things. Now, it's about what's practical. Is that working for her? Is her crisis mode enabling her to get through it in a way that she wants? And if so, cool. After the crisis is over, then let's get into doing this, because crisis means I'm spending everything I have on this thing, which means I don't have anything extra left over to think about or try new strategies and new ways of doing things. That's one of the worst things that you can do when someone's in crisis, is to say, have you tried it this way? Or if you do that, it might be easier, because they don't have capacity for that. And so what it gets translated as is, oh, this person thinks that I'm doing badly. They see me struggling and they want me to do better. And they're saying that if I did it this way, which I'm not capable of doing according to my estimations of myself in this moment, that I would feel better, but I'm not capable of doing it. And therefore, what it means is I am broken and bad. And not only that, but now I'm stressing out my favorite uncle Cecil, who is spending his time worrying about me because I didn't do a good enough job of hiding my crisis from him. So crisis is about getting through. When someone says that it feels like they need to survive, they do. Help them survive. And then when you get through, then you can talk about what do we want to do differently, including maybe not going for that goal anymore. Maybe that's one of the things that we change, is not that. So when then, Kid Squatch asked, is after the fact. Before is even better, but the whole point is that beforehand, we're not aware of what things are going to be problematic. After, once the brain is back online, once we're through. In the meantime, if you want to help, the only way to help someone in crisis is one of two things. Take shit off their plate without even talking to them about it. Just do it for them. And or be happy in their presence if they care about you. Because if you're around them and you're happy, not for them, but for yourself, just happy near them, then that reinforces that they're not making anybody's life worse. That like, even though it feels real bad what they're experiencing, they're not ruining your life, and that they're safe to be around you and to display that they're in crisis and struggling without ruining your day. I will also say, here's the exception, and I give this rule to my clients about the whole best thing. You get to pick one thing that gets your best. One. Because best means I am spending every available resource on this thing. My family gets my best. They don't get everything because I have other goals, but whatever is left over goes to them, right? And that doesn't mean that they're last on the totem pole. It means they're first. This is what I want to do and accomplish with them. These are the other things I'm also trying to accomplish, and I'm spreading my resources around all of that. And then if there's anything left over with that, it goes to them. Everything else gets the bare minimum. If your goal is to pass the class, not to get an A, just to pass, then what is the bare minimum you do to pass? And yes, that includes a buffer, right? Like, okay, I want to have like a D just in case something, or I want to have a C that's okay. But bare minimum to pass. And people don't like that. It doesn't feel good to say, I'm giving this my bare minimum effort instead of but it's bare minimum to accomplish what your goal is. So my bare minimum effort to writing a book is not writing a book, but that doesn't accomplish the goal. And my bare minimum of writing a book that I like and am proud of to share with people, I can't just slapdash something crappy off and call that my bare minimum effort, because it didn't accomplish the goal. So yeah, I work 8 hours a day. That's not bare minimum amount of time I could spend on work, but it's the bare minimum that I think I can put towards it and still accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. One thing gets your best, one. And you got to be clear about what that is. And then anything else that starts to slip into that territory, oh, I got extra time left over, I should probably start working again. Why? Ask. What is it you're trying to accomplish? Is there a reason that you should spend this time and this energy on work? What is it? Get it done, and then get back to whatever it is that gets your best.
Sounds like some good solid advice
Good
there.
sermon about that stuff, but there it is.
That's good. Cool. Well, that concludes another Wednesday of This Is Not Therapy Hour. Thank you for.
Oh, hold on. One question just came in at the end, but shouldn't her test be that? That's a great question. I'm going to guess no, but I don't get to say. She does, right? And just remember, markers versus goals. Nobody actually cares about somebody's score on a test. The only thing that a test score measures is how good you are at taking that test. But we believe that it's important because it does correlate to other outcomes we measure later that we do care about, right? But even a correlation is imperfect. If we say 80% of people who go to Harvard have happy lives, great, but that's 20% that don't, right? And those 20% need to know that that doesn't mean that they're bad or broken, that there are other things that they can do to be happy. So shouldn't her test be that? It depends. I don't know. I don't know her situation, her circumstances, but don't ever default. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. We always default to the rule, right? To the standard. Simplest is easiest. So what you're told to do is the best solution if it works for you. If it doesn't, that's when you got to question and say, is this what I want? Because if it's working fine, it's working fine. Let's go. Otherwise, get into the complexity because the test itself does not matter. We believe whoever designed the curriculum, designed the test, and part of that, believe that whatever that test is measuring, which is really just performance on the test, but we're trying to get at some acquisition of knowledge, who chose what that knowledge is and decided that it's important for you to know it. Even if it's correlated highly, it's still not always. So if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then we got to ask. And it may be, it may not be.
Cool.
Because otherwise you spend 17 hours studying, even though it doesn't do anything for you, or you put off studying until the last minute because you're trying to do your best. And you know, if you start 2 weeks in advance, you're going to spend 2 weeks on it. If you start the night before, you're going to spend a night on it. And either way, the result is going to be about the same. So might as well wait until the night before if I'm doing my best. Best means until I run out of resources. Sorry. That's a good question.
It was great. So it's a good chance. So thank you for that. We appreciate that. So, okay, we are over time, but thank you guys for this. We are Effective Artistry. Find us here every Wednesday at This Is Not Therapy Hour at 1 p.m. Central.
I'm going to drop. I got a client waiting. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.
You can find us at